Hi, Renee. Welcome. I'm so happy to be sitting in this conversation with you, talking about how small businesses can be supported in the age of disasters, all kinds of disasters, from wildfires to pandemics. Can you tell us a little bit about what you've learned in your many years in disaster and some of the most important lessons that can be applied for any small business or anyone who wants to support a small business in the midst of a disaster?
Yeah, thanks, Jennifer. It's so great to be here and be part of this conversation, which obviously, given the disasters that are happening now, is a global conversation to be had. I founded a business, Corporate to Community, which is all about activating and advocating for the role that businesses can play before, during, and after disasters. We're all about supporting building resilient businesses, helping communities thrive, and working in partnership with public and private sectors. And I think the reality is, there are so many disasters that are going to hit us, and businesses play such an important role that's probably a little bit undervalued and a bit misunderstood in many of the conversations. So we work with government and businesses to activate the role that they can play and what they can do to be a self-reliant sort of culture of resilience and be better prepared for disasters ahead, but also so that we can all come together to work to responding and recovering to disasters, so we have fabulous outcomes that benefit government and businesses and communities as well.
One of the things that I was really happy about in this connection between you and I is that our organizations are a little bit different from your typical post-disaster recovery and relief. What role specifically do you see for an organization like Rebuild North Bay and Corporate to Community in actually disrupting and changing and improving the world of disaster recovery and response?
Yeah, Jennifer, there's so much similarity between what we're both doing, which is really exciting for me. At the end of the day, disasters are different and we need to start doing disasters differently. And that's what I'm known for here. And it's very much around, we have a concept here called shared responsibility. So everyone, individuals, communities, businesses, government, we all have a role to play before, during, and after disasters. And the challenge and the opportunity that we have is identifying what all those roles are, and then having someone, and dare I say it, the likes of you and me, who can sit in rooms, bring people together, and we understand the multi-stakeholders, what all their capabilities are, what the outcome we need to be achieving, and bring together, a bit like a traffic cop, as you mentioned in some of our conversations before, and bring everyone together to be able to deliver a great outcome. So I think, that's what your organisation is doing so fabulously, and that's what we're, doing as well in Australia.
I was extremely thrilled to meet you because we are so unusual. And just in case people don't know, one of the things that we share is that our organizations are singularly devoted and dedicated to helping with resiliency before a disaster, but also after. That is all that we do, and it is long term. I think this is probably true in any disaster, that people rush in to help and then they rush out. And it's almost something that we call like the damage of the selfie moment, where you think, oh, okay, I've done this one thing. I've brought you donations that you didn't ask for, and I've dropped out things that you don't need, and I've inadvertently caused a secondary disaster. We believe at Rebuild North Bay that one of the most important things you can do is to say, what do you need and how can we help, which is about outcomes and not input. Can you tell us how that's played out with your experience in Australia?
Oh, absolutely. And, we had unprecedented bushfires, obviously, as, the world saw happening. And a lot of those bushfires went for, 5 or 6 months for some small businesses. And I think when a disaster happens, everyone wants to help. And it's great. We need help from, greater than government. We need help from the private sector. But I think there's a lot to be learned in terms of what is educated help and also what is non-consequence related help. Because as you said, the second wave of disasters is, I think it's a global problem. It's as big a problem here as well. And the other problem is, people rush in to bring food and they think they're trying to help, yet bringing in so much food without thinking about the consequences of it puts small businesses in those struggling communities out of business. And that's what we've been doing a lot of work, bringing together, the likes of the big supermarket chains and the retail outlets and that, to say, okay, we love that you want to support and we need you to support, but we need you to do it in a way that's not going to put the remaining small businesses in these communities out of business.
One of the other things that's been really compelling in our experience is that we look at disaster from a 360 point of view. So if you don't include all of the sectors at the table, you actually are not going to recover evenly or as effectively as you could. This means you have to have education at the table, healthcare, tribal leaders, and especially the private sector. Often what happens in a disaster is the event happens and the public sector is then solely made responsible for the recovery and the fixing of it and getting us back to normal. The first thing you have to know about disaster is you're never going back to normal once you've actually had that experience. The second thing that we believe very strongly is we need the talents and the entrepreneurial spirit of small business actually at the table talking about the most relevant ways to help them. One of the big differences in this COVID disaster is SBA actually did forgivable grants and loans, loans that become grants. That has made a remarkable difference right now in how we move forward. And what we're really hoping is that there's more of that support to come. Have you had a similar experience in Australia?
Yeah, 100%. So I often refer to small businesses as the forgotten stakeholders because they're more often than not at the table, and they absolutely need to be at the table. You know, they are small business owners, particularly in rural and regional communities. They're often the first responders. They probably wear dual hats, so they might be, you know, your local fire brigade lead, etc., etc. So it's imperative that they're part of the conversation before, during, and after. And I say, and you know, again, I think we're so aligned with this at corporate community and your organisation is the sense that people build resilience. So we need to be connected, and we need to be connected before. So we need to have, you know, small businesses and local councils and, you know, emergency services and all the non-profits and that meeting beforehand to understand, again, what role we can all play to contribute to the during and after. And that's going to make it much more efficient and much more effective during the recovery process because people will get what they actually need because we'll know it and we'll know who they are.
Because we asked, because that's often what gets lost is that we forget to even ask, what do you need and how can we help? And then work really hard together to make that happen. I'd like to talk about the role of advocacy in disaster, both before, during, and after. I often say that we at Rebuild are in the business of mitigation. We are trying to mitigate pain. And one of the ways that we're sure that we need a lot of help from the federal government and the state government. So we organize trips 1 or 2 times a year. We in the North Bay, where I'm at, experienced our devastating fires in October of 2017. Every year since then, we've had some sort of mini or major disaster, from floods to another fire and now a global pandemic that is very, very damaging for small business. We're very proud of the fact that we created a model here where we organize all of the entire trip for these, our elected officials and our business leaders to go back to DC to meet with leaders from both Republican and Democrat parties. We are not partisan at all. And the major agencies like SBA, USDA, FCC, HUD, and FEMA. We find that we get a much better response because we show up multi-sectored and regionally. Do you have any model like that in Australia?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, we're probably a little bit behind you in that space, but yeah, that's what I mean. That's, you know, that's why I established corporate to community and what we're trying to do, because there's such an important, you know, businesses need communities. Businesses need thriving communities, but thriving communities need thriving and resilient businesses too. And I think from our perspective, the public sector are starting to understand that. And to be honest, you know, we've had drought, we've had bushfires. And the response from a business and economic sort of support from the bushfires, you know, it was okay, but COVID has just changed the game here. It has absolutely shown that if we don't help and support small businesses all across Australia, particularly in the regional areas and the bushfire areas, we have massive problems because the consequences are that people can't stay in these communities. There's, you know, more depression. It just goes on and on and on. So now that there's, you know, greater awareness of, you know, the small businesses and the role that they play and the need that we have in terms of having thriving communities, the spotlight is just starting to come on them, which is really exciting because that's what we've been talking about for a number of years.
And it is a very important consideration to realize that when a business that everybody on the planet who's undergone this pandemic needs help. Small businesses in areas like ours, which have hung on and really provided for the community over and over and over again and donated everything that they could, maintained employment levels, got up every day, and did the really hard work of owning a small business. And we think that we actually owe them more in this pandemic. That what we said right away at Rebuild was, please don't ask the small businesses for anything during COVID. It is our time to do for them. And what our hope is that our leaders in Washington, D.C. and at SBA, which by the way, did a remarkable job getting all of those loans out. There will probably be more safeguards for where they go next time, but we truly commend them for a very fast pivot. And we hope that it also taught them and us that they can actually pivot and create really sort of mini miracle in the middle of something terrible, and we're looking for more. But it's really important to realize that in this case, if we let our small businesses fail, if we allow them to continue to suffer, we're going to lose so much of the value in our communities, so much employment, so many services, and we really hope that the future is on, not that motorcycle, you're going to have to edit that out, that the future looking forward is really on not only valuing them, but working extra hard on how it is that we can support small businesses and their families.
Yeah, 100%. And I think exactly the same here. And dare I say, you would never wish for this pandemic or bushfires to happen. But I think the response that our government has activated for small businesses has been great in relation to the pandemic. And, could that have been there for the bushfires to enable them to have the same level of support? Possibly, but it's taken this type of disaster to enable it to, be part of the agenda. And a lot of what we do is identifying gaps in terms of, what small businesses need and what help they're not getting. And I think a great example for us is after the bushfires, a lot of the towns and the small businesses in the impacted towns had 17 touch points of, different siloed organisations or government departments sort of asking them or telling them the help they needed, yet they weren't actually getting the help that they needed. So we started an initiative, Help a Small Biz, which is basically a virtual volunteering matching platform to say, hey, small business owners that are struggling from the bushfires, you tell us what you need, because you don't qualify for grants because you didn't have fire damage, you are indirectly damaged, and we'll just match you with professionals who can help. And we've had phenomenal success in the sense of, lots of businesses in regional towns that had never been online, and now they're selling online, or they've got, great social media because we've matched them up. And I think, that's what we need. We need to understand what are the outcomes and what do we need to activate to keep our businesses in business, and then enable that to happen with government or corporates or, communities or not-for-profits playing their role to enable that to happen as well. It's absolutely fundamental.
I think one of the things that was really wonderful in meeting you is we both have the same vision for our organizations, which is scaling it up so that more communities will be supported post-disaster with these things that we actually know work. Collaboration, having a traffic cop, for lack of a better term, who is like, this is your lane over here, you can take care of this, we're going to take care of this, you over there, you take care of this part, and regular communication. It's part of that de-siloing that is so important, especially always, but especially post-disaster. Can you talk to us about your vision for your organization?
Yeah, our vision, you're 100% right. I mean, we are all impacted by disasters, and it is the most siloed sector, I think. So our vision is that every business is resilient to contribute and support thriving communities. And no one can do that alone. No business can do it alone, and no community can do it alone. And it's also not the responsibility of government. So we are 100% about bringing everyone together to collaborate. And again, the traffic cop, we play that role to bring people together to understand, what they can all contribute, and then how we pull the pieces of the pie together so that we're all working as one. And that's the same as your organisation as well, Jennifer, from the conversations that we've had, which is so exciting.
It is so exciting. And our tagline is recover, rebuild, and reimagine. And during this pandemic, it's been really heartening for us to see people use the term reimagine over and over and over again. And I look forward to many more conversations with you, because I want to reimagine with you.
Yeah, same here.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Jennifer. Great to chat with you.
Great to chat with you as well.
Well, good afternoon. We are almost to the end of the 9th annual Building Resilience Through Private-Public Partnerships Conference, led by the Chamber Foundation in partnership with DHS, Northcom NORAD, and FEMA. This is Ask Me Anything, disaster response amid a global pandemic with FEMA. Joining us today is Carlos Castillo, the Acting Deputy Administrator for Resilience for FEMA within the Department of Homeland Security. So at FEMA, we continue to sustain the pace of the federal response to COVID-19. Certainly requires the whole community, but we're also being prepared and ready for the current hurricane season. And Carlos is a key leader at helping us with both. Just briefly, introduction for Carlos. He has more than 38 years of emergency and disaster management leadership at all levels, including international. He leads an organization really focused on building resilience ahead of the disaster, not necessarily responding to it, but does shape the response. He has a certified emergency manager designation, holds a master's in public administration from Florida International University, along with several other accolades that I am not going to get to because I think that you'd rather hear from him on some of his thoughts and perspectives. So Carlos, thanks a lot for joining us today. Interested in your some opening thoughts, and then we'll get into the Ask Me Anything portion of the time.
Thanks, Rob, and I'm looking forward to the Ask Me Anything portion of the talk. Yeah, I would like to provide some comments and perhaps give you something to think about as we go. First of all, thank you for the opportunity to be here today and to join you. As business leaders, you all play an integral role in all our efforts for FEMA at all levels. As mentioned, I'm the Acting Deputy Administrator for Resilience, and that I oversee national continuity programs, national preparedness programs and grants, as well as insurance and mitigation. Like many of you, I started my career at the local level. My time with Miami-Dade County in Florida gave me an appreciation for the unique challenges of local government. Effective disaster management is locally executed, state managed, and federally supported. I'm a true believer in this philosophy. For Hurricane Andrew, we believed our South Florida building code was the best in the country, and Andrew showed us our weaknesses. We also believed the federal government would handle everything for us. Andrew taught us to be self-sufficient as much as possible. Local government is really where the rubber meets the road for resilience. There's no truer test of resilience in our ability to bounce back and the situation that faces us today with COVID-19. In the beginning of our involvement in COVID-19 response, the FEMA administrator communicated 3 priorities for our organization, and they still hold true. And that's number 1, preserve the FEMA workforce. Number 2, lead the federal government response under the White House Coronavirus Task Force. And 3, we need to continue to perform our mission essential functions. While our nation mourns the loss of so many due to this hidden enemy, the fact that we can still hold important forums like this virtually is a testament to our nation's resilience. Of course, as we respond to the current crisis, we also need to be ready for other disasters. Preparing for this year's hurricane season, as well as other disasters, is one of the top priorities for our agency. Just a few examples of how we've prepared. We've identified a separate facility that will be an alternate National Response Coordination Center, basically our NERV center, our coordination center here in Washington. We're developing shelter guidance for folks that either need to evacuate or that can't return home following an event like a hurricane or perhaps flooding or other type of disaster. We're establishing virtual operations. You're using pictures and video streaming for impacted survivor homes for National Flood Insurance Program claims, as well as virtual damage assessments. We've developed a pandemic operational guidance for the 2020 hurricane season that's been distributed to all state, local, tribal, and territorial emergency management offices, and it is available through our FEMA website. We've also developed exercise starter kits that we've distributed that help for not just for hurricane season, but for reconstitution post-COVID or in light of COVID. We're also managing and distributing grants to state, local, tribal, and territorial, as well as nonprofit partners. So since this is a resilience conference, I would be remiss without pointing out the importance of preparing for the future as well. Hopefully some of you have had a chance to hear from my colleagues earlier this week on our Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities, or BRIC program, which will be rolled out later this year. We're also very excited about the impact that BRIC will have on our nation's future resilience to disasters. while keeping our attention laser focused on current disasters like COVID-19 and this hurricane season. So with that, I know we have time for questions, so ask me anything.
Thanks a lot, Carlos. I think the first question is, can you describe a little bit of how FEMA is preparing the workforce to operate with resilience throughout COVID to be ready for hurricane season or really any kind of other hazard that FEMA might need to support states with?
Well, thanks, Rob. Right after, as soon as we realized the potential impact that COVID would have on not just on our operations, but federal government operations that we're responsible for coordinating, we realized like I said earlier, we need to take care of our people. We almost immediately, it turned out it was probably 48 hours after we started, we directed as much telework as possible, and that included people from every area of FEMA, and they're over 90% of the agency is still teleworking. And we've learned a lot of efficiencies, a lot of ways to do business differently that although some positions have to be present here, obviously managing the National Response Coordination Center, but others don't. And we've learned to for instance, receiving applications for grant programs and a lot of the number crunching and the analysis that's necessary, that can be done anywhere. So that continues in the background as we're visibly and visually responding to COVID response. We've done a lot to protect our workforce, and we've learned a lot from the response to COVID-19 that we were going to adapt to other operations, especially on a grand scale. That this has been unprecedented, that every single state, territory, and tribal area has been declared a national disaster.
So just as a follow-on question, looking at a number of questions, so thanks everyone for joining those in the chat. You were in some of the real initial briefings, conversations around then in COVID-19 before it was even COVID-19. Can you give some impressions around some of those the first 48 hours, if you will? After we started to really understand and that this is going to be something to really truly grapple with?
Sure. And this those initial periods were probably 6, 7, 8 months ago, maybe. It seems like years ago now because so much has transpired. The truth is there was a lot that wasn't known at the beginning about the virus and how it would spread. We had working on it some of the best and the brightest in the world, really. Working to develop the plans and our strategies. We mobilized early on. Like I said, we put a lot of people, directed a situation of maximum telework. We knew we had a pandemic plan that had been developed from previous plans, but again, this is something different. Nobody really knew, I believe, the extent to this would actually be where it is today in those early days. But we were planning for the worst. It's just that the worst, that goal line kept being extended on what the worst was. And hopefully we've seen the worst. But the truth is, in our business, we have to plan for the worst and hope for the best. And we know that in order to do that, you take care of your people. You have to, there are other things that you have to be able to respond to because the country counts on us to respond to the hurricanes, the earthquakes, like there was one in the Pacific Northwest early on after our activation for COVID that we said, luckily there wasn't major damage, but there could have been. So we wanted to make sure that we were ready for that, and we've implemented a lot of measures in order to do that. Thanks.
So you mentioned employees quite a few times, and also fatigue and mental health. We've got some questions coming in, kind of twofold. One, around grants and allowability for grants for mental health, and then any recommendations on how to deal with the grind and the mental stress throughout this extended response.
I think whether you're in government or you're in the private sector or the nonprofit sector, your people are your greatest resource. There's a lot available out there. FEMA has a lot of on our website. If you access that, there's a lot of good tips, a lot of information to where you can seek assistance. We're doing that for our employees and making that available and increasing the awareness that that's available. And we're holding every supervisor, letting them know that they should be still communicating with their folks, understanding that as their most prized resource, that they're in touch with them and understand what their needs are and have a way to talk through a lot of these issues, because everyone really is affected, either directly or indirectly. We all know somebody who's affected, and we've done a lot here to implement measures. You know, I walk around with a mask in my pocket and put it on whenever I'm in public, you know, and I think it's just becoming second nature and something that we have to do. So it's thinking towards that in ways to prevent this and from getting worse. You know, it's mitigation, it's what we do. But there's a lot of lessons to be learned here, and we continue to do that and share that. You know, on the mental health side, you know, though FEMA specifically doesn't provide direct grants funding for mental health, there are programs out there. Health and Human Services, Department of Health and Human Services, they do a lot, and they have a lot of funding available that in different areas. And I would suggest, you know, for folks to check through their website to get the latest information for that. If that answers the question.
Yeah, it does. And can you describe a little bit about the boundaries, if you will, of FEMA's responsibilities? You know, we, you know, certainly through the National Response Coordination Center, bring capabilities together, people together. We've had to do so rather virtually now. Can you describe, you know, our role and responsibility when it comes to some of the international aspects of response, given some of the other responsibilities of other agencies like state and USAID?
So FEMA, you know, we've in part, you know, because of our success in a lot of the operations that we've had, a lot of the major disasters, you know, 2017, if you remember, several hurricanes, you know, both in the continental U.S. and outside. We had flooding, we had wildfires, you know, historic wildfires in California. That allowed us to even improve more of our coordination role, which is our role in disasters, whether natural or human generated. Our role is to coordinate the federal government response. Our NRCC, our National Response Coordination Center, is where that happens physically, either by people there or remotely, like we've been doing with not just our own employees, but other agencies that are teleworking as well and working virtually in ways to help ensure that we're coordinating that and we're responding to other things at the same time, other disasters, looking at ways to do as much virtually as we can with that, Rob.
So you mentioned federally enabled or supported and state managed and locally executed emergency management. How do you see the different? Trying to paraphrase a couple of different questions here. How do you deal with the uncertainty of potentially what a locality will do from a mitigation standpoint? The mask issue is probably the one that seems to be at the forefront, and you see the private sector, large corporate partners come to the fore, mandating masks in stores and other locations. Where does FEMA play in all of that from your perspective?
Sure. So, and not just in COVID, but in other disasters. You know, I mentioned earlier, most effective disaster management is locally executed, state managed, and federally supported. And by locally executed, who knows better what the good, the bad, and your capabilities and limitations and your risks and hazards are at the local level than the local government. And the people who live there, who deal with this situation daily, who knows better than them? So, you know, we don't want to come in and tell you what to do or step aside, you know, we've got this. The point is we want to be there to help support that financially and through our coordination efforts so that it isn't all the separate federal and other agencies that partner with us coming individually. It's a coordinated approach. It's a coordinated response through the national response framework. And that's true in mitigation. You know, we provide a lot of funding. You know, I mentioned BRIC, the Building Resilient Infrastructure and Community Program. This is something that will be rolled out later this year. And it makes a lot of funding available for the local jurisdiction as they can, we know that it's much more effective, not just in terms of results, but also it's more cost effective to mitigate these damages or these disasters that we know these hazards exist early on than it is to have to rebuild afterwards. So whether it's you know, on the mitigation side, if it's masks that help you prevent something and mitigate potential damages from COVID, then by all means, you know, we encourage that. We, in part, we lead by example. Like I said, I've got my mask with me. You know, everybody's, you know, at the building is screened before coming in at our building here at headquarters, as you know, and we wear masks, you know, and maintain 6 feet of separation. So those are all things that we lead by example, but we have our responsibility nationally to help coordinate, but we work through and with state and local governments as well as the private sector, because the private sector, you know, a lot of what is done on a daily basis, the services that are provided aren't provided by the federal government. They're provided by the private sector, by you all at this conference, many of you. And this is the way we want to support that. In this way, we believe it enables you to continue your mission as it does ours as well.
So one of the questions, and actually there are a couple of questions that essentially ask, how can we focus on resilience and preparedness while we're in the middle of an ongoing response that is protracted, but also dealing with some of the potential hazards like wildfires in the West, certainly hurricanes. The hurricanes are ever present.
Well, you know, FEMA being the national organization with the responsibility to coordinate this response, we have a lot of resources, a lot of people that are working. You know, we have people that are assigned to the response, and that primarily through the National Response Coordination Center, but also others supporting that. We also have people that are working on some of the mitigation, the areas that I'm responsible for on mitigation, prevention, preparedness. We're doing a lot in preparedness. You know, one of our goals, even before COVID, was to improve financial emergency preparedness, you know, for individuals and communities, and especially for individuals, knowing that it's difficult for some people to set aside money. You know, there was a Department of Labor study that showed that more than 40%, about 44% of the U.S. population, this is pre-COVID, more than 44% of the U.S. population couldn't afford an unexpected $400 expense. So now with COVID, we suspect that's probably even much higher. So we're encouraging people whenever possible through ways of increasing financial preparedness. We know that not everybody can set aside money or can afford insurance, but many can. And many people who can, who choose not to, those are the ones we want to get to. Those are the ones we want to increase the awareness and showing that insurance is the most effective tool for disaster recovery or emergency recovery, whether it's flood insurance or property and casualty insurance. That is going to be much more effective. And the worst thing is to have, you know, people who decide not to go with flood insurance, and then home is flooded and it may be all paid for, and they figure their home has been in their home for generations, and then they lose everything. You know, those are the things we want to try to prevent by some of our programs.
So we only have a few minutes left, so I just wanted to let everybody know, appreciate all of the different items that are coming in. However, I don't think that we're going to get to all of them. One of them that did just come in is, since mitigation is essentially kind of under review in almost every state, are you seeing some hints around establishing business resilience centers or community resilience centers kind of as a resilience counterpart to an emergency operations center? And is that something that we get behind?
I'm sorry, what was the last part?
Is that something that FEMA would endorse or get behind?
Absolutely. We encourage, like I said, whatever can be done at the local level. I come from a local level. I was the emergency manager for Miami-Dade County during some busy hurricane seasons and other events. And we reach out, we work closely with the private sector, things like especially the Greater Miami Convention Visitors Bureau, other organizations that helped us get to the local and larger companies. But I think a lot of that starts at the local level and encouraging that work, whatever can be done, whether it's called a Business Resilience Center or a local or what you had, Rob, the National Business Emergency Operations Center. Those are things that a lot of it can be done virtually. And what comes down to it, the best product that comes out of a command center or a coordination center is that coordination and the place to be to get the information on the situation and the resources. And what better to partner to have than the private sector in getting that accomplished.
So some of the wrap up questions that I've just kind of purposefully selected for the back end. One's around, where do you see FEMA going into the future? If you look at 2017, historic disaster year, we're in the middle of making history right now. Where do you see FEMA going into the future?
So I see us. I prefer to have a positive outlook and a positive forecast. I see us to the point where people have seen the effects and the potential effects of COVID-19. They're taking more steps to prepare, not just for a potential pandemic, but more steps to prepare for other disasters that can happen, because it can happen anywhere. And I see a lot of people doing that, and I think that's a positive step. I see us in that role, providing the guidance, providing the tools that we do now, but more of that and doing more of it remotely, doing more of it virtually, because that is the thing of the future. And we see the benefits of it. Many people who have been doing this for a long time that doubted whether we could telework effectively or that we could hold forums like this virtually. And here we are. It's been a successful forum, I believe. I was here last year and the year before, and I've seen the interest in it this year. So there's a lot of things that are necessarily going to be done virtually, and I think that's a positive step. We want to help lead that charge.
So last question, and this is really a personal one. So you've served in two different key positions at FEMA, and some of the questions are around that, but also, what are your key takeaways from some of these positions, and what advice would you provide either to someone in government or someone in the private sector that's thinking about joining FEMA?
I'd say sign up. My first position was the assistant administrator for recovery, and this was post Katrina. Katrina was another historic event that brought a lot out, and it brought a lot of the good out in the agency. And I was impressed, like I am. Impressed then, like I am now, with our response to COVID, the people that work at FEMA. And it's not just in headquarters in Washington. We have 10 regions throughout the country. We have FEMA integration teams, which is basically people from FEMA that work at the state level to help coordinate and be that liaison function that have been invaluable in our response to COVID. Those are things that there's so much to do in emergency management, and FEMA leads the way in that. There are a lot of things that we do that people at the entities at the local level just don't have those resources. We want to partner, and we want to be able to provide that. But I'm so proud of the people that I work with here at FEMA and some of our other partners as well, that really step up when it needs to happen, and saving lives, even if it's indirectly or directly with some of our capabilities like urban search and rescue. The point is we're contributing to saving a lot of lives, especially on some of the parts that I'm responsible for would have to do with mitigation and prevention. So if we know that this is a threat or a risk or a hazard, let's take care of it early on.
Well, Carlos, thanks for your time. Thanks for your leadership. Thanks for all of you for your time and leadership too. We are going to be followed by our colleagues from the Coca-Cola Company and its Disaster Action Alliance, and they're going to talk about expanding their network. So over to you.
Good afternoon. My name is Yunice Emir, and I lead disaster relief for Coca-Cola North America and serve on the Disaster Action Alliance leadership team. I hope you've enjoyed today's programming as much as I have. We've covered a lot of ground today, and as we've heard from nonprofit, corporate, and government voices who are leading the way as we combat the challenges facing our communities right now. But as great as our challenges are, I hope you also feel as inspired as I do by these innovative leaders who are rising to the occasion and leveraging their time, talent, and resources to move the needle. And on behalf of the Disaster Action Alliance, I'd like to especially thank all of the DAA member organizations who participated in today's sessions, including Good 360, Team Rubicon, UPS, the Home Depot Foundation, Coca-Cola United, and the American Red Cross, and many others attending and working behind the scenes to make today possible. And of course, a huge thank you to the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation, also a DAA member, for hosting this meaningful and engaging conference. We helped form the Disaster Action Alliance 2 years ago with the vision of creating spaces and opportunities for disaster response professionals to learn from each other, partner together, and collaborate to make an even bigger difference in our communities. Today, this group has grown to include more than 60 disaster response leaders from a wide range of industries and sectors, and it is growing every day. And our definition of disaster is growing every day too. As the threats facing our communities continue to evolve, so too must our definition and plans to respond to these events, including both natural and non-natural disasters. In addition to working together to respond to natural disasters like weather events and pandemics, topics we covered today, the DAA is actively preparing for how we can make an impact in the event of non-natural disasters, a category that encompasses incredibly important and timely issues like humanitarian relief, social justice, and non-natural disasters. Unfortunately, this group here today knows all too well that the numbers of natural and non-natural disasters are only increasing. That is why it is critical for all of us, including the DAA, to evolve both our understanding of disasters and our response strategies so we can continue deploying the right resources to the right people at the right times, always standing ready to meet the needs of our communities. Now, my colleague Katelyn will share more about the ever-changing work of disaster relief and the Disaster Action Alliance. Katelyn?
Thank you, Yunice. I'm Katelyn Jackson Nnake. And as Yunice mentioned, this work is truly ever-changing, and we must remain resilient and also open to collaboration in order to find effective solutions. If you're attending today's conference, we know that you understand the importance of private-public partnerships to help support our greater communities. For some of you, your invitation to join us today was because of some of your established collaboration and partnerships in our hometown markets. And as the definition of disaster continues to evolve, we invite you to formally join our collaborative efforts in the Disaster Action Alliance. Members of the Disaster Action Alliance benefit from being a part of a network of fellow CSR, nonprofit, and disaster relief professionals, access to collaborative resources, shared best practices and insights, as well as opportunities to engage in joint volunteer opportunities. As we expand the Alliance footprint across North America to create more localized responses to disaster, we are beginning with our hometown markets of Washington, D.C., Los Angeles, and New York City. Through the DAA, communities across the country impacted by disaster will continue to benefit from our stronger, swifter, and smarter collective response. It truly is a win-win. For those interested in learning more or connecting, I ask that you visit disasteractionalliance.com. Our information is also available in the Coca-Cola Company sponsor booth that is a part of this conference platform. Thank you again for being here today. We look forward to collaborating with you in the future for a better shared future for all. And now I'd like to introduce our colleague at the U.S. Chamber Foundation, Mark DeCorsi.
Well, thank you, Katelyn and Yunice, and of course, Carlos and Rob at FEMA for those great insights. What a terrific way to end our conference. And once again, very special thanks to Coca-Cola North America for being such an incredible partner bringing in today's conversations. I'm Mark DeCorsi at the Chamber Foundation, and we all know disasters in the form of a hurricane or even a pandemic are complex events with far-reaching impacts for our health, our economy, our very lives. But they share one thing in common: the need to collaborate across sectors, industries, and organizations. I was thinking, as we host this event every July, there's another summer classic that is also hosted in July. It's Major League Baseball's All-Star Game. Participants at both represent their respective teams. They wear their team hats, but they have a common uniform, and they work together. But unlike professional baseball, all of you are saving lives and livelihoods. So for that, thank you. We're certainly stronger when we work together, and I hope you're leaving this conference with new ideas, inspiration, and the connections to build a future that's stronger than the next disaster. Now, last summer when we convened, who would have ever thought we'd be where we are today? And there's no telling where we'll be next year, but I'm hopeful in 2021 we can meet in person. A special thank you to our federal partners, DHS, FEMA, NORTHCOM, for making this event really successful. And also thank you to our SHAPE leaders and event sponsors for their continued support of our programs and our events. And finally, thank you to my Chamber Foundation colleagues, Brooks Nelson, and Alexa Miller, and the rest of the Foundation team, as well as the Chamber AV and IT teams. Today's information superhighway still has some bumps in it, but when you convene over 100 speakers and 36 sessions across 3 days, it ain't easy. Hats off to the Chamber team. Thank you. And one last thank you is to all of you, the attendees, and our speakers for all of your participation. And I'm also pleased to share with you, we have one more item. Tomorrow at 11 a.m., we have a very special interview as part of the Foundation's Path Forward series. The U.S. Chamber President, Suzanne Clark, will interview Dr. Anthony Fauci, Director of the National Institutes of Allergy and Infectious Diseases. You have to register separately for this one. It's complimentary, and you can do so at the Chamber Foundation website, uschamberfoundation.org. With that, we conclude. On behalf of the entire U.S. Chamber, thank you and stay safe.